Welcome to The Word in the Works, TWTW. And today we are getting into chapter one. Finally, we're getting into the background, the story of Dr. Victor Frankenstein. I'm Pastor Ben Meyer, and my co host is Pastor Jason Goodham. And Pastor Goodham, what do we find in this first chapter?
We find all of the things. It's such a loaded chapter for really just getting the story introduced. I mean, the whole chapter's backstory, but it really sets the tone on the major themes for the rest of the book. It really establishes Shelley's position as the author, but also her position in how this is going to be narrated through Frankenstein's worldview. And it's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. It really is from his worldview throughout the whole book, isn't it? As he's sharing the story, and that is an interesting aspect of things, because you get to know not just what happened, but what he thinks about what happened and how he filters things and interprets things, and that's a it's a very interesting thing. So as we get the background, so again, he's sharing this story. He's telling this story, and he begins at the even before the beginning for him, right?
Yep.
He shares the story of who?
Of Beaufort,
Okay.
his father's friend.
All right.
And Beaufort has come on hard times. I think the very first thing we're going to notice is how foreign the culture sounds to us, because it's very much a status and almost a caste-driven culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's status-driven, but even in older works, status can be recovered. But Beaufort is presented as a part of a caste, and he loses that status because he loses his wealth and basically ends up dying of clinical depression.
Mm. Yeah, it's a sad deal. Um, but Beaufort is going, he goes through this awful time. And yet, in the midst of that, we have Victor Frankenstein's father. And what do we learn of him?
Well, Frankenstein's father, we were just talking about this before we recorded. Frankenstein's father is going to play an important role in all of this. He introduces us to the theme of friendship from Frankenstein's perspective.
Right.
Now, what this is interweaving with the premise of the book, because Walton, on his journey to the North Pole, was obsessed with friendship. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
There's a
he
great
thinks,
line. There's a
yeah,
great line there that my father loved Beaufort with the truest friendship. And so you got, those early letters where he, it's not Frankenstein, it's Walton is just desperate for friendship. And here we have, just the very beginning of Frankenstein talking about his story, and he already is describing his father as this true friend, this genuine friend to this person who was in need. And it's very, very much what Walton is looking for and desperate for. And yet, Frankenstein, at the same time, we're going to find out, is kind of cut off from that genuine friendship for various reasons as the story goes on as well.
yeah, if we're going to do spoiler alerts, we find out
Yeah.
that not only Frankenstein is cut off from friendship because
Mm-hmm.
of his own punishment of himself, but he's not a good friend. And it's right in the story. He never is a good friend. And the interesting thing, my theory, we'll trace this through. My theory in all of this is that Shelley intends to paint Frankenstein as future Walton.
Uh-huh.
And so you see what Walton desires in Frankenstein, Frankenstein intends to be a warning back to Walton.
Right. Yep.
And Frankenstein, for his part, is mildly self-aware. He's
Right.
not acutely self-aware, but
Right.
he is mildly self-aware, which is more than we can say for Walton from the early letters.
And
Walton,
I think Frank Victor is mildly self-aware, but I think he's kind of self-aware a little late. Like
yeah,
it's always like a beat late where he's like, "Oh, wow, yeah, I kind of messed that one up, didn't I?" He
yeah.
never has any foresight of it.
Well, and I mean, he's telling his story in hindsight, so that
Yeah.
makes sense. But
Right. Right.
it's it, as you sift through the early sections, I mean, this is the first chapter, so we'll have early chapters, but these early sections of the book with the letters and then now the chapter, it's really hard to determine who the main character is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Who is the recipient of the moral?
Mm-hmm.
And so there, Shelley's a masterful writer,
Oh
and
yeah.
I
Yeah.
was kind of laughing as I was reading through these chapters again. On the one hand, the romantic language that she employs, as you know, as a genre, is exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It never is halfway. There's never anything that's normal. You're either all the way ugly, or you're all the way beautiful,
Mm.
or you're all the way committed, or you're all the way a recluse.
Yeah.
And it's that's romanticism in a nutshell. But at the same time, her employment of themes and words and interweaving them, where it'll just pop into the story for 2 seconds and then it'll be gone. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
not paying attention, you won't even notice it.
The layers are just
Yeah.
incredible. She is a tremendously gifted writer in the layers within chapters, and then it just builds and builds and builds. But okay, let's get back to the story that he shares. So his father, what happens as a result? Beaufort dies, and his father does what?
Well, so even more, that Beaufort dies almost in secret because he was so ashamed he wouldn't even tell where his friends where he was living.
Mm.
And so his father goes on this 10-month crusade to find him, and he essentially finds Beaufort on his deathbed.
Mm-hmm.
And so Beaufort dies, and Beaufort's only daughter had been caring for her father and trying to work side jobs making baskets. But the weaker her father got, the less she could work. And so they're in poverty, and now they're destitute as his death. His daughter has no prospects, and right at the right time, his father, Frankenstein's father, we should just call him like Ed or something. Ed Frankenstein steps in, very unromantic. He steps in and takes Beaufort's daughter under his wing, puts her under his care, and then eventually marries her. And this is a notable thing because Ed Frankenstein is the same age as Beaufort. So
Mm-hmm.
this woman he marries is
Right.
young enough to be his daughter.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an interesting point that we don't get a name
Yeah.
for his father.
Well, and so that goes with my theory. I think
Yeah, go ahead with the theory.
yeah, I think
It's a good
Father
time.
Frankenstein is either intentionally or unintentionally designed to be God the Father.
Mm.
And he's very much spoken of in terms of the fatherly aspects of the first person of the Trinity. The themes of like the first article of the Creed, as we get to know his father in this first chapter, are there. We're really introduced to the idea of divine providence in the person of Frankenstein's father.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes in at just the right time, and he's benevolent but just, and all of these things.
So he marries Beaufort's daughter, and partially it is a marriage of it's done in out of love for Beaufort and for the daughter in wanting to care for her.
It's very much a Boaz Ruth sort of dynamic.
Yeah, that's a good comparison for it. Here's this person who is in need, and she shows herself to be very, I mean, in her caring for her father, she is selfless, she is dedicated, she's devoted. And so he marries her. And yeah, going back to your idea of him kind of symbolizing, um God the Father, representing, we have some cues on why you might think that, right? So there's a line that there was a sense of justice in my
Hmm.
father's upright mind, and the way that he loves, he strove to shelter her as a
Yeah,
fair exotic is sheltered by the gardener
I
from
think
every
that's
rougher
huge.
wind. Yeah. So he is caring for her and protecting her, and he does things right and just. And that comparison of the gardener, goodness, you can't
Yeah,
miss that.
that's rife.
As a, even we can see those things, right? um
Yeah,
you have the idea of God the Father, putting this garden together and giving Adam and Eve this wonderful garden to take care of. And even after the resurrection, who does Mary think is standing there? Oh, it's the gardener. Well, it's not, but it is. It's not the gardener you were thinking of, maybe, but it is the gardener, right?
and it really, again, it's so hard to do this without the knowledge of the chapters that are coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at least in the first few chapters, his father is presented as a source of life,
Hmm.
and then Frankenstein's activity in artificially creating life is a different source of life entirely. And Frankenstein always contrasts that.
Okay. Anything more on the father, or do we want to move on? Because the next character is fascinating and very important too.
Yeah,
The ne-
so I think the only thing I wanted to highlight in that same paragraph with the father loving Frankenstein's mother is you kind of get one of those little signatures of the author without her inserting herself. The entire setting of the story ties us back to Shelley's life, where the being in the Alps and traveling through Europe is what she was doing when she wrote Frankenstein.
mm,
So she kind of writes herself into the book by giving us little glimpses of what her actual life was like.
okay. Okay. So in the next paragraph, um, we get a little bit more on the mother and the care of Frankenstein's mother, who is Beaufort's daughter, and she also is very loving, affectionate. Um, there's a great line at the end of that. I received a lesson of patience, of charity, of self-control. I was so guided by a silken cord that all seemed but one train of enjoyment to me. So again, wonderful father, wonderful mother. And then it says, for a long time, I was their only care. My mother had much desired to have a daughter, but I continued their single offspring. When I was about 5 years old, while making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, they passed a week on the shores of the Lake of Como. And it goes on to describe this situation where they come upon uh, this child who is in desperate need. And this is an interesting difference from the original. The one we're going through here is the what 1831 version, I think, is
Yeah.
that is, and I think the original was it 1818?
1816, 1818,
Yeah,
somewhere
something
over
like
there.
that.
Yeah.
And in the original, this child is a cousin, and it's, spoiler alert, right? Frankenstein is to marry this girl way down the road. But I think Shelley makes the change from this girl being a cousin to this girl being an orphan that's adopted, because it just doesn't sit real well with the audience when they're reading along and they're like, wait, he's going to marry his cousin.
Yeah, yeah, it's it's edited for modern tastes
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
and yeah, it's just really interesting how, knowing that backstory, what Shelley felt compelled to go back and change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
I think I the prefer the original because it's just harder to read,
Yeah.
based on what, the way Shelley painted her characters.
Yeah. The original, um she doesn't explain things as much as she does in the 1831. So there's more left for you to have to decipher and to figure out, what do you do with this?
Yeah.
And I think that's actually more enjoyable and a little bit richer. However, since we're in the 1831, that's what we're going to deal with.
Yep.
All right. So, um, how do they come upon this girl, and how do they decide to essentially? Well, I guess they adopt her, right?
So again, with her parent, or with Frankenstein's parents being, portrayed in the ideal.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm really going to run with my fanciful thoughts here, if Father Frankenstein is God the Father, Mother Frankenstein is portrayed as the church,
Mm-hmm.
and the obligation of the church, or of the mother, is based on what she has received from the love of the Father. She feels obligated to go out and help the poor.
Right.
So there's a commentary in that. But so as they're on vacation, they go into one of the poor neighborhoods, and they find this poor, impoverished family of five. Uh, Four of the kids are dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants, which made me laugh out loud. Right to the
Just,
point.
no subtlety.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, this daughter,
Right.
is a vision. She's by looks, apart from the rest of the family, we find out she's of the noble class and has been orphaned. And when this family was on better times, they took her in, and then they have fallen on poor circumstances. And this Elizabeth is a little Miss Beaufort. She's the image of what her mother was, and so her mother adopts her, and that is the big light bulb for everything else that happens after this.
Right. Yeah. All right. So then they bring this child back with them. Bring this child home, and we get a little bit of I'm just going to read this last paragraph here, because it is uh there's so much in there that we got to go over. So, everyone loved Elizabeth. The passionate and almost reverential attachment with which all regarded her became, while I shared it, my pride and my delight. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had said playfully, I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it. And when on the morrow she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own. We called each other I'm going to
Familiarly.
familiarly, my goodness, by the name of cousin. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, more than my sister, since death, till death, she was to be mine only.
Hmm.
Goodness. So, we get this wonderful image of Elizabeth. Everybody loved her, and yet here, Frankenstein, Victor, how does he regard her?
He covets her. He
He
hoards
does.
her.
Yeah.
It's the difference between Christian love, and especially Christ's love for the church,
Right.
and Victor's love for Elizabeth is stark.
Hmm.
So you go to a place like Song of Songs, and you have I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine.
Right.
And so in the air of romantic love, there's that biblical idea of possession, but
Hmm.
it's a one flesh union possession.
And a
And
giving of self
yes,
to the other.
exactly. Because I think particularly because Shelley in Frankenstein downplays romantic attachment, that you don't get to make that leap. Victor's not doing a one flesh sort of, possession language here. He is hoarding a thing
Yeah.
that he wants his own.
Yeah.
And
This is
that,
possessiveness.
yep.
This is not love and respect and honor and um, you know it's selfish. It's selfish at its core.
And this is really our first clue that Victor Frankenstein is not the man he aspires to be,
Right.
and is not the man he sometimes claims he is.
Yeah. And so in here we get again we get the bizarro view of marriage, right?
Yeah.
It's not marriage as it ought to be, where yes, my beloved is mine, I am my beloved's, and it is this selflessness. Rather, we get my beloved is mine, the end, and nobody better try and take her away from me. Nobody better try to anything that is paid to her is really mine. um and nothing is going to separate me from her except death, and not because I will be there to serve her and help her, but because she belongs to me.
Well, it's a very Gollum sort of thing,
Yeah.
you know. it's
My
it really
precious,
interesting.
yes.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
but this selfishness at the end of the first chapter is a stark
Yeah.
contrast to the selflessness first of Father Frankenstein,
Right.
and then of Mother Frankenstein, and then
Hmm.
in the next chapters, even the selflessness of Elizabeth.
Of Elizabeth, of friends that he
Yep.
has along the way. I mean, goodness, there are loads of examples of selflessness and love in this book, but not from him.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to add on
Uh,
for this chapter?
to tie it up, I want to go back to one thing we kind of went through, just because I thought it was one of the most interesting sort of things that kind of ties this all together. At this big paragraph where we're introduced to Elizabeth,
Right.
Victor's reflecting on his relationship with his parents as an only child.
Mm,
And there's a real interesting turn that I don't want to miss. And he said, I, their eldest child, was born at Naples, and as an infant accompanied them in their rambles. I remained for several years their only child. Much as they were attached to each other, they seemed to draw inexhaustible stores of affection from a very mine of love to bestow them upon me. My mother's tender caresses and my father's smile of benevolent pleasure while regarding me are my first recollections. I was their plaything and their idol, and then this is what follows, and something better,
mm,
their child.
mm.
And the Christian imagery in that, again, we can put best construction on that description because,
Right.
in the Father's eyes, we are delights. We
Yeah.
are his creations. We are the object of his affection. But more than that, we have the adoption as sons.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the fundamental relationship that Victor doesn't understand.
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
if you if he turns his eyes to Elizabeth, he can get the idol and he
Right.
can get the plaything,
Yeah.
but he never gets that familial attachment
Yeah.
to Elizabeth like he claims he wanted to have.
And like he claims that he does have, he claims that they have that, but um then when you look at the words around it and you're like, no,
Yeah.
no.
And well,
And it's what you see in broken marriages and broken families, where they'll have maybe the right words that they use around things, but you look at what it actually is and how things actually are, and you go, no, that's not really what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, the actions betray the reality.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, good deal. Okay, anything else for today?
Oh, that should suffice. That's
All
plenty.
right. Awesome. All right. So next time we'll get into chapter 2 and continue in the story of Victor Frankenstein. Join us again next week for more of The Word and the Works, TWTW. He gone.